Welcome back to part two of our Emily Dickinson episodes. This is Dark Academia Queen. This is episode 51. If you're new here, please hit that like button, ring that bell for notifications, subscribe, Pepper Girl out. We're going to continue on with part two as we talk about one of my favorite poets of all time, Emily Dickinson. So, we left off with our views on marriage. So let's go ahead and continue that. With such dogs that did not belong to the Palms alone, writing to Gilbert in the midst of their courtship of Austen, only 4 years before their marriage, Dickinson painted a haunting picture. She began a discussion of the union but implied its unconventional connections to the marriage was not the meaning, and she wrote, "Those unions, my dear Susie, by which those to live alone, and the strange adoption, whereas wherein we can out but look, are not admitted, however, fills our hearts." Hmm. She also commented, "How dull our lives must seem to be a bride and the plighted maiden." Like, here's the thing, I don't so it was very much clear where Emily stood on marriage, like, especially of her time, it was very uncommon. And well, many would say she was a spinster of her time. But anyway, she also had this weird obsession with black. I think that's one reason why she's also one of my favorite poets. But anyway, the bride for whom the gold has. Where did I leave off at? Okay, now that Susan Dickinson would not be join Dixon in the walk, become increasingly clear as she turned her attention to her social duties, befitting the wife of a rising lawyer, and Emily and Susan would basically fall into the wife role as which was a product of the time and everything. But as her relationship with Susan wavered, other aspects of Dickinson's life were coming into fore. In the 1850s, marked a shift in her friendships. As for her school friends, married, they sought new companions. Defined by written word, they divided into the known correspondence of admired authors. No new source companionship of Dickinson, and the books were primary voices for her own writing, regardless of the writing that endorsed her master in the academy of her father. Dickinson read Riley, um, read a lot of contemporary authors from both sides of the Atlantic. Among those were Romantic poets, the Bronte sisters, the Brownings, and George Eliot. And also, from the American point of view, was the company of Longfellow, Thoreau, Hawthorne, and Emerson, which I did an episode. I've talked about Emerson and Hawthorne. You can go and check that out. As well. I can't remember which episode numbers they are, though. You have to go back and look. Oh my gosh. But anyway, with a knowledge of balances that suggested a new home that she knew could be revealed, claimed that not to have been Whitman, she read Thomas Carlyle, Charles Darwin, Matthew Arnold. Her contemporaries gave Dickinson a kind of currency for her own writing, but commanding equal grounds were the Bible and Shakespeare. Where the authors were here had defined inaccessibly the allusions of Dickinson's poems and letters also suggest just how vividly she imagined the world in conversation with others. Included in these episodic conversations were the actual correspondence. The number of were growing, and in two cases, the individuals were editors. Later generations have wondered whether she saw Samuel Bowes and Josiah Holland as men who will likely help her with her poetry in the print. Now, Bowles was the chief editor of the Springfield Republican, and Holland joined him in 1850. Excuse me. With both men, she forwarded a lively correspondence, and to each of them she also sent printed poems in the paper, such as "Nobody knows this little rose, taste a liquor never brews, safe in the alabaster chambers, flowers, well, if any, blazing gold, and quenching a purple, and a narrow fellow in the grass." The language in her letters are similar to a passionate language of her letters to Susan. Now, You probably thinking the same thing I'm thinking, right? Well, she readily declared her love to him, and as readily as declared her the love to his wife Mary. And each of these she hoped for an answering spirit from the settlement settled on her different conclusions. Josiah Holland never elicited declarations of love. When she wrote to him, she wrote primarily to his wife. In contrast to the middle to her friends who married, Mary Holland became a sister, and she did not have to forfeit. Now, these friendships were in the early moments of 1853 when Edward took up residence in Washington as he entered what he hoped would be the first of many terms of Congress. Within their father's absence, Vinnie and Emily spent more time visiting, staying with the Hollands in Springfield or heading to Washington. In 1855, after one visit, the sisters stopped in Philadelphia to return to Amherst, staying in their Amherst friend's Eliza Coleman. They likely attended church with her, and the minister in the pulpit was Charles Walsworth, and he was renowned for his preaching and pastoral care. And Dickinson found herself interested in both. She eventually deemed Walsworth one of the masters, and no letters from Dickinson and to Walsworth are extant, and yet correspondence with Mary Holland indicates the forwarded many letters from Dickinson to Walsworth. Now, the content of the letters are unknown, but Emily felt that it needed to be sent under a covering hand of Holland suggested intimacy critics referred to have been long puzzled over. As with Susan, the question of their relationship seems irreducible to familiar terms, which, while many have assumed a love affair, there is little evidence to support a sensationalized version. The only surviving letter was written to Wadsworth to Dickinson, dates from 1862, and it speaks of a pastor's concern for one of his flocks. Now, whether her letters to him or the has he been, in fact, the last to survive? There are three letters addressed to an unnamed master. But there are also silent in questions and whether or not the letters were sent, if so, to whom. Now, Emily had not been burnt. Ugh. Oh gosh. So, at the time of Edward's law partnership with his son, it became a daily reality. He returned to his family and homestead. Emily had not been born in the house. The Dickinsons had resided there for the first 10 years of her life, and she also spent time in the homestead with her cousin John Graves and Susan Dickinson. And during Edward Dickinson's term in Washington, he became the center of Dickinson's daily word, for which she had out upon circumference, writing hundreds of poems and letters within. It was not, however, a solitary house, but increasingly became defined as the proximity to our houses next door. Austin and Susan married in July 1856. They settled in the Evergreens in a house newly built down the path from the homestead. So, for Dickinson, the next years of her were powerful and difficult, and her letters were centrally um, her friendship. And as commented by Bowles in 1858, my friends are my estates. Forgive me for the advocacy of whole. Now, by this time in her life, there have been significant losses to that estate during the death in the first master, Leonard Humphrey, in 1850, the second, Benjamin New, in 1853, and there are also losses of the marriage in the Mirror of Loss. Now, whether comforting Mary Bowles on a stillbirth, remembering death of a friend, or consoling cousins Francis and Louise Norcross after their mom's death, her words sought to accomplish the impossible. Split lives and never get well. In her letters, though, she would write into the divide, offering images to hold their lives together. We'll talk about her poems now. Her poems follow both the cadence and the rhythm of the hymn that form that she adopted, and it was like a fertile ground for like the poetic exploration through the faithful unpredictability and that she could connect off the forms. And while certain lines accord with their place in the hymn, it's like her poetic style was so amazing. Like go back and read some of her poems, like the dash, the ellipses, and everything else. They're there for a reason. But the late 1850s marked the beginning of her greatest poetic period, and by 1865 she'd nearly written 1,100 poems, bounded on one side by Austin and Susan Dickinson's marriage, and the other severe difficulty with her eyesight, and the years between had explosion expression between the letters. In her own stated, the ambitions of cryptic contradictory, and later critics of episodic comments of her wickedness as attacking acknowledgement of her poetic ambition. In contrast to joining the church, she joined the ranks of writers, a potentially suspect group. Distress, however, extended her only certain types. If she associated herself with the Wattses and the Cowpers, my mind automatically went to Bridgerton. I'm sorry. I'm trying not to go to Bridgerton. But anyway, um, she literally respected, if it is found toward Pope or Shakespeare, she crossed the ranks into liberty, and her poems themselves suggest that she may have made no such distinction. She blended the form of Watts and the content of Shakespeare, and she described the personae of her poems as disobedient children and youthful debauchees. So, the place she envisioned for her writing is far from clear. Did she pursue the friendships with Bowles and Holland and hope to that these editors would help these poetry go into print? Did she identify her poems as candidates with her polio pages? In her April 1862 letter to the well-known literary figure Thomas Wentworth Higginson certainly suggests a particular answer, written as a response to the monthly article Letter to a Young Contributor. The lead article in the April issue, her intention was unmistakable. Higginson's response was intrigued but not impressed. He had received her poems that day and he wrote the letter. Now, while Emily's letters were clearly piqued his curiosity, he did not readily envision a published poet emerging from poetry. While upon a fount poorly structured, and he had made clear by one of Emily's responses that he counseled her into these workings. Now, while Emily spoke strongly against publication, once Higginson had suggested the inevitability, her earlier remarks tell a different story. In the same letter to Higginson, so what about the minimum publication, however? It was not a retreat to completely private expression. Her poems circulated widely among her friends, and she was in the audience instituted herself. What do y'all think of Emily? I personally love her. I know this has kind of been a long podcast, so you're probably by asleep by now, clicked out, or whatnot. But anyway, that is it for this episode. I will see y'all next time. Y'all have a great day.